warm welcome to this afternoon's second event in our series, Understanding Biodiversity and Climate Change to Enhance Teaching and Learning in Namibia. This is, as I say, the second event, and we have an exciting speaker, Tendai Kasinganeti. Tendai is an independent climate policy expert looking at climate change and the challenges and responses. He has over a decade of experience in environmental, climate change adaptation and mitigation and policy. He contributes in addressing the most pressing global issues affecting African communities. Tendai has led regional in-depth climate assessments, including environmental and climate advisory and technical assistance through impact assessments, frameworks, guidelines, and adaptation strategies, including for the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform in Namibia. And Tendai has worked for and continues to work for an absolutely incredibly impressive list of organizations, which I won't go through because it's very, very long. So Tendai, I want to welcome you. But before I hand over to you, I just want to put a little bit of a context. My colleague, Johan Kruger, pointed out an article that was in CNN yesterday, CNN World yesterday, so it's very current. And it talks about how last summer was marked by deadly extreme heat and devastating wildfires. And the last summer was the warmest in the last 2,000 years. And this study, the way that they came to this conclusion was by analyzing weather data and tree rings to reconstruct a detailed picture of the past. So radical changes, obviously, and I think nobody's better to talk to us about this than Tendai. Tendai, please, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kirsten, for this opportunity, and good evening, everyone. I hope we are all in the same time zone, or good afternoon from wherever you're joining from. Yeah, as introduced by the glorious introduction, thank you for that. My name is Tendai Kasinganeti. I'm a climate change, climate policy expert. I've done quite some work, as already introduced. Today I'm going to talk about understanding the biodiversity and climate change to enhance teaching and learning in Namibia. And this is mostly related to the experience that I'm going to give are related to the number of years that I have been in Namibia for a while. I think almost close to a decade. I've done some work in Namibia. I've been staying and living in Namibia as well. So yeah, I look forward to sharing with you, and we can also go on to ask questions after for clarity. Let me try. Great, there we go. So I will start with giving an overview of climate change and globally, and what does it mean for Namibia. I think we always hear about climate change being spoken about, but we would need to be able to know how does this really affect us and be able to contextualize with our environment, with our scenarios or contexts within which we are. I was hoping to know where most of you are joining from, whether are you in Swakopmund, are you in Windhoek, are you in the north, Kavango, Zambezi, or maybe you're joining from Moshakati or Ngwediva. It would be good to know where most of the participants are joining from, so that I can also be able to contextualize, and you can also feel free to ask questions in that regard. Great, yes. If they can join and just indicate where they're coming from, that would be great for more interaction. So I would just like to say the International Panel for Climate Change concluded, or they mentioned that the global temperature has warmed further than we always anticipate, and this is at 1.1 degrees since 1990. So, well, this is not technical, but I'm trying to just to show you what this means. So this estimated 1.1 degrees in global temperatures, then was projected to say if we continue having temperatures rising in this way, without reducing, and if we do not maintain our temperatures below or 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, we will have a lot of challenges with regards to our global climate. Now, most of these emissions are as a result of or this to global warming to get to 2 degrees Celsius is as a result of global emissions by developed countries that are mostly in Europe, that are mostly in America. So only Africa accounts for about 0.4% of global greenhouse emissions, and west of Namibia contributes less than 0.005% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So what this means is that the global warming effect is getting to become more and more dangerous, resulting in many impacts. And Africa, including Namibia, is more affected by this because we do not have the capacity to adapt to all these changing environments. Now, in Namibia, we have projected that we will require about 3.5 billion of Namibian dollars to implement the mitigation commitments that they have been noted. So this means that climate change is so dangerous. It's affecting our environment. It's affecting our resources. It's affecting many activities that affect our day-to-day livelihood. So I'm going to go next into what exactly is climate change affecting within our communities. So, you know, within our within our environments, we have a lot of resources that we are used to, and these resources are literally what we always say, our resource base. Most of our communities, they depend on those resources. So I will talk about, we have forests, like our national parks, our community forests, our conservancies, which are all over the country. We have swamps, some people call them wetlands, especially in the areas around the north during the rainy season when we get the fish, the frogs, all that type of food that we eat during the rainy season. So that is where the swamps are. Then we've got the trees, which are found within our community areas, within our hills, and mountain ecosystems, which are also very important, especially in areas in the south and in Kunene region. Mountain ecosystems are very important, and they're a very important resource, important for the wildlife, important for food, important for minerals. So most livelihoods depend on these resources. We also have pocket forests, which support livelihoods, mostly in Katima, in Kavango region. You get to realize that these forests provides food, they provide medicine, they provide forage for animals, and they also act as a natural air purifier. And you realize that is why most of the people also enjoy being out within these forests as compared to being in the urban area. We also have our big rivers, small and big rivers, the Kavango River, most importantly, the Zambezi River and the Orange River, especially in 150 days. Anyone from the south, Norancho Mudi would know how important the Orange River is, from supplying water, from acting as a natural purifier, to the fisheries and all of that. We also have some valleys that are in the country, as well as resources, including mining sites. So all these ecosystems, they coexist and interact to provide us with a livelihood. So how do these ecosystems interact to provide us with a livelihood? So I'm giving you here an example of a study that we did in the Zambezi region to develop nature-based solutions for World Wildlife Fund. There you will get to realize that so the ecosystem services that I have mentioned, and how exactly do they benefit the communities? So we did a study, we had focus group discussions, we had key informant interviews, just to know and to see how exactly does this ecosystem help the communities to survive. And these are the answers that we received, ranked 1 being the least, and with 3 being the most important. And under forest, you see it has issues around rain formation, attracting tourists, home for wild animals, and employment for locals. Swamps, as I have mentioned, mudfish, grass for thatching and consumption. Hills also providing herbal medicine, trees, firewood, timber, furniture, charcoal, construction materials, and climbers for building beams and brick making. Mountains are also important, but they're not that much. They're not frequent in the north, especially in the northeastern part. So, but they also contribute to rain formation, animal grazing. But this is more as we are moving towards Grootfontein area, where you get more mountains coming up. Pocket forests, they are really plush around areas in the Kavango and Zambezi area. They are very important, the valleys and water ponds. So you see how these ecosystems, our biodiversity resources, provide livelihood, not just in terms of food, but provides food, provides opportunity for a livelihood to get money through charcoal, through construction materials. You can be able to send your children to school. You can be able to sell and buy food, cooking oil, send your children to school based on just these resources. Now, these resources, the ecosystem services that I've indicated, are now being affected by climate change. And how are these being affected by climate change? We have observed that there are what we call climate change hazards. So what are these climate change hazards? Climate change hazard is the occurrence of certain climatic conditions in a way that may pose risk or that may cause us challenges within the communities that we are. So what did we observe, or what did we also learn from the communities? Rainfall here, as you can see, it's increasing. Drought, they have increased and their frequency has prolonged, which means we will have a high occurrence of drought. For example, where we used in Southern Africa, including Namibia, we used to have almost 8 to 10 year periods of droughts, but now they are very short, maybe 3 years, then you have another drought. In some instances, you have recurrent droughts. This year you have drought, the following year, back-to-back droughts are being experienced. And sometimes we have floods where they're not expected to occur, they occur. Where we never experience floods, we get to experience them. In some instances, especially those within the rivers or valleys, they've experienced also issues around landslides, which have increased in terms of frequency. Dry spells have prolonged. These dry spells, sometimes you would realize that if farmers used to farm between October and April, now, and which was normally the rainy season, but now the dry period is extending until maybe end of December or January. That's when you start receiving rainfall that you can plant with. But even worse, the rainy season starts, but it does not even compensate for those 6 months. It just rains for 3 months and then it stops. So these impacts are the ones that were indicated by the various farmers and community members as they are experiencing them. The other issue, then this brings us to unpredictability of rainy seasons within our communities. So, what have all these contexts have meant or meant within the rest of the country? So this was as an issue with the northern Namibia, and we also did a study to see what's happening in other regions throughout the country. And it's the same. The increased temperatures, we have hailstorms, we have wildfires, we have flooding, and sometimes occurrence of heat waves. Last year even this year, we have instances of extremely high temperatures that you wonder what is going to happen. So all these are being recorded. Here I put a photo for you to see. This is in Mariental. For most of you who know what happened in 2015 in Mariental, it's something that has never been experienced in the area. And then it was experienced once, and we never got to hear of it again. But maybe one of these years, we may get to see something like this again. This is how we have unpredictable extremes of weather events. These extremes of weather events may be in form of rainfall, may be in form of extreme heat, may be in form of extreme winds, may be in form of extreme heat that even affect with sea level rise. All these factors, they come together and they affect how we normally survive or live as a community. So lastly, I would like to give you a highlight on what. Okay, all right. I see your question. I'll answer that. So we have these climate risks and all these climate changes and all what I have highlighted. But now, how do changes in biodiversity or impacts on biodiversity, how does climate change impacts on ecosystems affect how we live as a community or how do we access resources? In some instances, we may be from the urban areas, we may not really see some of these, but most of the community members in the communal areas, in the peri-urban areas, they experience these impacts on a day-to-day basis. So, some of the key changes and hazards in communities, they relate to water security, they relate to health, they relate to food security, they relate to livestock patches, as well as impact on infrastructure and roads. So water security is in a way that there was, I wish I put that photo, I forgot to put it. There is a very interesting time we were working on a project between Katima and Ngoma. And you can see the hand dug wells that mostly people survive on for water, but they are drying up. But in most times, in most years, they never got to dry up. And you have now increased frequency of diseases that now it's a proven fact that climate change affects the type of diseases that we have, the strains of viruses or certain diseases that may affect us. And sometimes these prolonged weather events, maybe prolonged rainfall, even cause more frequencies of maybe cholera or of malaria, depending on the type of climatic conditions that we have. Food security is something that we know it's happening. Right now, the government has increased the food bank to see how can we get more food to the communities. This is how much climate change is in fact impacting livestock and pastures. And this has got to an extent where in most areas, for example, within the Erongo and Kunene region, which is around human-wildlife conflict and wildlife and domesticated animals conflict, where sometimes lions are eating goats, sheep, because they are looking for water outside of the park areas. And elephants are also running dry, and you get to see so there is a lot that is happening in the wow, this is impacting our day-to-day life. Now we look at the key infrastructure and services, roads and schools. How many times have we had or looked in the At NBC, we looked at New Era in the Namibian, where wind has taken or affected schools, where roads have and bridges have been eroded by water. But these roads and schools have been there for the past 50 years. So this shows you how much these extremities are affecting our lives. And how this is impacting our day-to-day is increased food insecurity, reduced access to potable water, reduced access to herbs and communities, especially to access these parks, increased health incidences of health such as malaria, increased pests and diseases affecting crops, livestock, and wildlife, reduced access to grazing lands. We know how this is a challenge on grazing land now. We know there's been now, even now we're talking of how climate change is now a new pathway to conflict and lack of social cohesion in areas because of the fight for land, grazing land, fight for water resources. So all these are the impacts of climate change. The other issue is reduced access to schools for children, this is leading to increased dropouts. But not only access, even health is affected for the children. Even lack of food can also result in increased dropout. Even lack of water also affect or leads to increased dropout. If there's no water, there's no food, they cannot bath to go to school. So all these issues have been raised when we're having these KAI interviews within Katima Mulilo. So I just wanted to highlight what is climate change, not define it per se, but how exactly is it affecting us, and how does it affect our day-to-day lives? What are the climate risks that are posed by this, and possibly give you an idea of the current landscape that we are currently living in with regards to climate change. I'm not going to go any further in this regards. This is where I will end, and we'll open for questions and to discuss further as we are discussing this issue of impacts of climate change on ecosystems and biodiversity. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Tendai. Fantastic. I just want to thank you wholeheartedly for sharing your knowledge with us. You put it all very eloquently and clearly, and I think my understanding of the climate change context is really much improved. So thank you very much for that. Just for the audience, Tendai and I decided that we would do it in this format so that we would have him giving a shortish presentation, and that we would then have a lot of time to delve deeper into the questions that are that would bring up information that would be of most interest and value to the students. I do want to just thank the students for being here, the university students and the teachers that are coming from Nardit. They are our primary audience, and it's fantastic to have you here. So I see that there was a question in the chat, and I'm going to start off with that, Tendai. You saw it as well. So it's from Laura Gia Diaz, and she asks, are these observed changes and hazards data observed by the communities?
Thank you so much, Lara. I like the question, really. Let me also try to do this. Okay, great. So these change. What we did was we were supporting the development of a nature-based solutions project for the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, as well for the Greater Virunga landscape up in Uganda. So this is a belt that comes right from the Okavango going up until Kisoro in Uganda. So what we did, we picked certain communities where there are nature-based solutions projects proposed. We discussed with them to know what are we were creating climate risk profiles for those specific areas, and we have to interview most of these community members. So we interviewed for example, within an area, would interview maybe the World Wildlife focal person in that area, the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism focal person. We interviewed the chiefs or the headmen, And community members, sometimes they call them CDCs, community development communities, and we sit to discuss to hear what are they, and this way in form of either would have a community focus group discussion and targeted interviews depending on availability. So these are hazards, these are changes that have been observed within communities, and the hazards that have been also recorded or observed by the communities. So the data that we gathered, the data that we gathered was just specifically to actually address the climate risks that are being experienced in that specific community. So we have to design it based on what that community mentioned. So this is actually coming from the communities and not secondary data that is being modeled, but this is coming from the people. Yes.
So I see Alyssa up on the screen. Alyssa, you set a whole bunch of, actually, Tendai, I told you about Alyssa creating a whole bunch of questions for you. They're really excellent questions and they really pertain to her students, her teachers that are in training. Tendai, I'm going to start with the very first one. Why is climate change such a big topic on the Namibian agenda?
Okay, great. Thank you for that question, Kirsten. So for Namibia, you realize that climate change is a huge thing because the first thing is that as Namibia, we are an arid environment. That's a fact, and more than 50% of the country is arid. We have very low rainfall, but we rely on this rainfall so much that our source of living or livelihood relies on this. That is why it is very important that if you are living within an arid climate, in arid climatic conditions, and if we rely on rainfall, then the impacts of climate change are likely to be felt more because we have got high vulnerability because the impacts of climate change are going to affect us more than any other country. Then another thing is that we have limited resources to address our vulnerability. For example, if you look at countries like Dubai that are well advanced, they can have a lot of these challenges in terms of water supply, but they can easily invest in a desalination plant to supply to their cities. But for Namibia, we are not able to do that. And not everyone already has access to water. So this makes us vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The little water that we have is also now becoming more and more scarce, which affects our livelihood. And secondly, is that we also rely on tourism and ecosystems. In fact, most of from down south, Nuduva, going up until Katima Malilo, it's a tourism economy, and we rely on ecosystems and biodiversity for this tourism to thrive. And climate change, even the part of our GDP is very much dependent on tourism. But climate change is also affecting this, and this makes us way more affected. Not only because the government gets the revenue, but even our communities, they work within some farms that do this tourism. They sell artifacts. We sell a lot of things to tourists when they come into the country, and this affects us. Then, lastly, I would like to highlight an aspect that relates to issues around agriculture. Namibia does not produce a lot of crops and plants, and most of them are important. And the little that are produced within the country which are mostly what we call subsistence crops, they are also mostly reliant on rain. They are rain-fed agriculture. So what that means is if we are not able to climate our agriculture is being experienced by the communities, it's on the ground, and that is why climate change is very important for Namibia. I hope that at least illuminates some of the elements why this is of importance for the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Tendai. I think it's great that we've let you have free reign because, yeah, you really are providing us a lot of deeper insights. So thank you very much for that. I see that there's a hand up. Evaristo Bruder, would you like to ask your question, please?
Oh, okay. Thanks for a nice presentation. I would like to know more about pocket forest and implication of it in Namibia. And the second question is, the presenter explained that there was increase in rainfall, but also there was increased frequency of drought. So I'm just a little bit confused.
Okay. Okay, can I take that one, Kirsten?
Yes, please, Tendai. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Okay, so pocket forests, these are dense forests that you find occasionally, yeah, especially down in the northeastern area. And these forests, they provide habitat for some of our animals that are not out, you do not normally find out in the open, and they are very important in terms of ecosystem value and support to support the nexus that exists within the community. So these are the pocket forests that I'm referring to. Now, with regards to water, whether it's getting a lot or not. So I've indicated that we have extended dry periods where we do not get water or rainfall, let me say. But I also indicated that, yes, sometimes you get a lot of water, then you get flooding. So I guess that is where what confuses you. So it's very interesting that we get what we call extreme weather events occurring within our communities. These extreme weather events, it means this year we may get very little to no water. Then the following year, you get a lot of water, such that it's then even result in flooding. But the previous year you had no water. Or you get what rainfall during the times that you don't really expect to get rainfall. So all these things are the same, or they occur in such a manner that you cannot predict that you have rainfall today. You cannot predict that you have so much rainfall and quantify and prepare accordingly. So in some instances, you have a lot of water. In some instances, you have less of it. But what we are not having is normal water, normal rainfall periods that you can be able to plan your farming. You can be able to know that this is now October, this is now December. I can plant beans now. I can do this. It's not predictable anymore. That is where we are getting those challenges in terms of rainfall. And normally we refer to it as rainfall variability in terms of how rainfall now varies and results in extreme or extended drought events or extremely wet periods that we not be able to manage. I hope that answers you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tendai. I'm just going to read out the comments in with Lara's in the chat. She says thank you for the answer that you provided before. So obviously you did fill that question, sorry. She says you mentioned you are mapping nature-based solutions being implemented in the landscape. Is this information available? Her organization is working in the Zambezi Valley in the Zimbabwean side, and it is hard to find platforms where communities can share their experiences using nature-based solutions. Tendai, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Dr. Kirsten, and thank you for your question, Laura. Well, yes, we have been mapping nature-based solutions in Namibia, in the whole Kaza area, which also include a bit of Zimbabwe and into Binga area. However, this work is not yet public. We're supporting a specific organization and we engaged and we are looking forward that hopefully before the end of the year, they will announce the findings because we're still mapping out these nature-based solutions, doing a climate vulnerability risk assessment. So based on the vulnerabilities in the communities, then we would be able to develop nature-based solutions that fit that specific community instead of the other way around where you just say, no, in this area we need to do dredging, then you just bring a project that does not really address the challenges in this or that in those specific communities. So unfortunately, I will not be able to share more information, but there is a public project being implemented by the International Institute for Sustainable Development called the CAPA. And yeah, it's a nature-based solutions project that you could start exploring around and to see how you can maybe also collaborate with them. But the information, specific information on the NBSs is not yet out in public. Thank you.
Thanks, Tendai. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to go back to another question from Alyssa and Pandaleni. They ask, what is the role of environmental education in implementing the climate change policy?
Okay, what is the role of environmental education implementing climate policy? So environmental education is very important for the country. Why this is important is that we are in a period where we need to raise a generation that is climate conscious. And how do we raise that generation that is climate conscious? It starts with even as much as preschool. In climate consciousness has to be taught. We used to have a lot of what we used to call environmental consciousness, environmental education that looks at waste management. It is still very important. It is important for our society. It is important for our sustainability. But climate consciousness goes beyond environmental consciousness in that our children will start to understand what are the impacts of climate change. And then we build a sense of ownership and responsibility to address those climate impacts from a very young age. Also, this will, at the end of the day, result in behavioral change and to promote sustainable practices. And once we teach importance of soil moisture. If some of you remember when we were young, we were taught when you want to plant, when you want to farm, you take a donkey or a cow or a tractor, and then you just dig in and plow. But now we are going towards new conservation approaches where you have to just dig the specific area you want to plant a seed, conservation agriculture, and then you plant, and then you do not have to disturb the rest. So such a change in mindset, it means it has to start from that same young age as well, because that is how we were also molded. So it helps with behavior change. Lastly, I would like to highlight that it builds capacity by empowering our teachers, by empowering our students with knowledge and skills. It then strengthens the future of Namibia's capacity to adapt to climate change because the foundation is there, the understanding is there, and the impartation of knowledge and capacity is there. So it is very important, and we need to find more ways in which that we can support with environmental education, training of trainers within our teachers, and develop some of these projects and find ways in. And there is a lot of funding sometimes that is available to support teachers. So these are some things that we need to start exploring in that regard. I hope that helps and clarifies. Great.
Thanks, Tendai. Right, so I'd like to move on to another question. If anybody in the audience wants to pop up with a question, I'm waiting for hands up. But in the meantime, is there an overlap between climate change policy and the Namibian environmental education, environmental sustainability development policy? Tendai, did you get my question, or should I reread it?
Can you please say it again?
Yeah, sure. Is there an overlap between climate change policy and the Namibian environmental education, environmental sustainability development policy?
Okay, So, was it late last year? Yes, it was late last year. Around September 2023, we're doing some regional consultations in Namibia, trying to see what type of activities are being done, but this was mostly for carbon projects development. What really struck me was there are environmental education platforms within most regions where most of the teachers are being taught, where most of the teachers are getting access to this environmental education. And the Ministry of Environment is also promoting through the environmental education pillar, and organizations such as Environmental Investment Fund are also supporting responses in terms of environmental education. So is there an overlap? Definitely, or clearly there is an overlap in terms of environmental education, environmental policy. But what may need to be is to pronounce more the importance of environmental education in these policies, because mostly they highlight more on capacity building, on especially not environmental education in the lower grades, but mostly capacity building of maybe tertiary education students, or capacitating those that are already working. But I think in addition, to complement general capacity building and knowledge sharing, we need to get to environmental education, because that is where we can be able to promote sustainable practices, promote ideas that protect the environment. In this way, for the future, we will not have to invest more in capacity building and training, but we're also now looking at some other issues that can look at implementing ideas, more research, because we already have the understanding from a younger age. So I think these two policies, they interrelate. There's a need for mainstreaming, but I believe there's a lot of work that is already going into that, including the work that NADIT is also doing as part of that capacity building being implemented. And it's very important that we still embark on this. And I think we are just starting. There's need for more work to address this policy alignment that may be required. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Tendai. I would like to ask the last of Alyssa's questions and Pandaleni's questions. They're super questions, according to me. This one is around, and I think you have spoken to it already, but maybe you can further elaborate. What is the role of teachers, schools, and students in climate change mitigation and adaptation?
So I think I have highlighted a little bit on it, but I will be happy to also extend. So students, schools, teachers, and students will actually have a very important role to play in climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation in Namibia. How? By integrating climate change education into curriculum, teachers will be able to equip students with knowledge, skills, and become responsible environmental stewards within our community. So that is very important, to find how do we integrate or provide an opportunity for teachers to include environmental or climate sensitive education in this. Then schools can serve as models of sustainability by implementing practices such as water conservation, promoting energy efficiency, teaching conservation agriculture projects, teaching how important are ecosystems, providing models for nature-based solutions. Schools can actually be the models of our future communities if there is capacity provided to them. While students at the same time, as I have indicated, that these are the future, in the next 5 years, 10 years, we will have more of these students graduating, getting into bigger positions, into influential positions as the time goes. So that means we will have an empowered, students are empowered with knowledge, and become agents of change to influence families, communities, and Namibia's future to climate change. Over to you.
Thanks, Tendai. There were a couple of things that came up for me. I'm an ecologist, so I kind of have a bit of a leaning in that direction. We had a very interesting conversation with a wonderful scientist. She's actually in on the audience, I saw, Gail Thompson. I'm not sure if she's still there. But Gail actually brought up, she's actually an expert both in climate change and has written articles on climate change in Namibia, as well as being involved in human-wildlife conflict. And she spoke about also how extreme weather events can affect, can increase human-wildlife conflict. So I hadn't thought about it before, but you've also mentioned that now. And maybe I can just bring up quickly as an announcement is that next week's NADIT event has been postponed by 1 week. So it will be on the 29th of May instead of next week. But we will send out a notification about that. But Gail Thompson is going to be speaking next week on the 22nd, and it will be from 10 until 11:30. So if any of you are interested in human-wildlife conflict, she's going to be taking a much deeper look at the causal factors behind human-wildlife conflict. Gail, I don't know whether you want to just pop up quickly. If you would like to, then that would be great. Otherwise, no problem.
Kirsten, she's not in anymore.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I'm sure, Laura, we can give you Gail's contact. Mirette will do that, I'm sure. Okay, so then the other question, Tendai, that I had, and I'm not sure whether you would be able to answer it, but it's looking at invasive vegetation in Namibia. I don't know what the situation with Namibia is with invasive vegetation, whether it is a very large issue. I mean, seems to be everywhere. But given the extreme heat and high temperatures and devastating fires, I would imagine that if there is a lot of invasive vegetation, then there's more biomass for burning. Can you answer that?
Thank you. So, well, I would try to answer that. I'm not much of an ecologist per se myself, but yeah, we're looking at there is a study that was done by through the support of GIZ and South Pole. They were looking at invasive vegetation in Namibia, especially in crotcher bush and other bushes. So what was actually interesting in that study was that they had trends that there has been an increase in terms of encroacher bush, or maybe it is because sometimes the encroacher bush require less rain as the other maybe indigenous tree species, if I may say, and they grow at a faster rate. So this has been affecting availability of grazing land. Sometimes the animals are also eating, and it is resulting in diseases. So, or especially browsers. So what this means in terms of climate change is that from my expertise, we have been trying to see how do we address this issue of invasive species, and that is why that study was also done. And the idea there is to do biochar projects out of that, biochar carbon projects out of that. In that manner, we store carbon in biochar through a process that burns these invasive species, and in that way you can be able to claim credits, you can be able to get investment in the communities in that regards. So the faster rate of growth for these invasive species has also brought an opportunity for communities to be able to do carbon projects or biochar projects, not the traditional charcoal that was being done as previous. So in that regard, I think this was it's an attempt to see how do we address the issues of invasive species. But you only see these in mostly controlled farming areas, but in the communal areas, there's no responsibility to say whose responsibility is it really to take care of these invasive species. Yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Tendai. Very interesting. I see that Alyssa has got her hand up. Thanks, Alyssa. Go ahead.
Thanks, Listen, and hello, Tendai, and also all of the TSUSD alumni and also students from universities in Namibia. I just actually wanted to say thank you to Tendai it's really, really interesting talk, and I think it's very relevant. I hope our teachers can take a lot from it. I especially appreciate that you actually brought it back down to how climate change would, that it's different in each of the regions, or that it will impact different areas differently. And that it's good to hear that there are people that are working, taking a bottom-up approach and not a top-down approach when it comes to developing solutions. And I hope that that's something that our teachers can take away. And but yeah, I appreciate that you said how it would affect school children. And so I hope we have more conversations like these. I think this is only the beginning. But it's good to hear that people are also talking about nature-based solutions already, and I think that's for our teachers and also the students. It's good that we can start learning these terms. And thank you so much for introducing all of that to us today.
Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you, Tendai, again. It was great, great thanks from Melissa. So Tendai, back to you. Would you like to leave us with any final words of wisdom? That's the challenge.
Great, thank you. Apologies to the participants. If you cannot see my face, I'm smiling broadly. My internet is not stable. That is that is why I do not have a video on. But great, it is a pleasure that I've been invited to this talk. Really, it's fascinating how we can make an impact to the various communities that we come from, and very happy and excited to contribute, to give back. It is more than just a talk, because I do hope that this information you can try to put it into practice. And for those that may be interested to discuss further, you can reach me directly. I can be able to have some additional information if you may need any. And I'd also like to indicate that not that I talk on behalf of the government or other organizations in the country, but it is good to continue engaging our authorities, especially in the education sector, to see how can they develop projects, how can they enhance the curriculum, especially in terms of climate education. It is now very important to make sure that climate sensitive education is being given to our children, because some of these impacts or issues that we experience within our communities, we may not be able to address them if we do not educate our children about this. Otherwise, we will be in the same situation that we are today if we do not also start from a very tender age. They say teach them young, so we need to start teaching them at an early age on how to implement conservation. And maybe Dr. Christian, this is also something to see how do we also capacitate our teachers, give them more knowledge in this specific aspect, so that whenever they're now teaching students, they can be able to impart this knowledge in a manner that ensures sustainability, and that they also have an understanding. Thank you so much for having me today, and I look forward to following some of your talks. I think this is very interesting, and I'll be really keen to follow as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tendai. I see that there's a message in the chat from Liesel. Tendai, she just writes, please contact Eco Awards, who can assist schools with sustainable environmental criteria, which can be implemented in a practical manner at the schools. I'm not sure who she's directing that to. That's, yeah, of interest. Okay, so Tendai, thank you so much. You filled exactly an hour. Well done. And yeah, with that, I would like to greet everybody a wonderful evening.